Well, Edith, it is so kind of you to join us today. Uh, I want to make sure and take this opportunity to thank you for being here. And we thank you for all of the incredible years of service you have given to our churches and to our conference. And you're an important person to me and to my own faith journey. And so I want to give our congregations, both in Federated Church in Weatherford and First Congregational in Norman, a chance to truly appreciate you as you head into your last year of serving us. So it's coming up, and you've announced your plans to retire. So I don't want to let you out of here without hearing from you and I want our people to get a great sense of who you are, and so that your legacy will continue to live on in all of our hearts and minds. So if you don't mind, tell us about yourself, maybe your faith journey, your upbringing, any important things that we should know about Edith Guffey in your journey.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, David, to be here and have this conversation. I still remember sitting in the office in Wichita when you called the very first time, and your kids were too young and you weren't ready to make a move, but you would call periodically, and then the time came where you really were ready to make a move. So I'm grateful for the journey and the time that we journeyed together until you really were ready to join the United Church of Christ. It's been a great pleasure. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. And it is a kind of amazing experience and journey for me to actually be at this point of thinking of retirement and in the United Church of Christ. I didn't grow up UCC, and that's really becoming the story of many people in the UCC. I grew up in the Baptist church, in a small Black Baptist church in Kansas City, Missouri. My family didn't go to church on a regular basis until probably I was about 5 or 6. My father was, we were kind of a Christmas and Easter kind of family. My mother went to church fairly often, but my father didn't until my mother had a stroke. And churches did what churches do all the time. Even though we were not regular attenders, the church really reached out to my family and cared for us. And my father I guess he probably said, there must be something to this church thing. Even though we aren't there, this church is caring for us. And my father and our whole family started going to church. My father was actually basically drank during the week, during the weekends, and went to church and didn't during the week, but he basically stopped drinking. And now that I'm an adult, I know now what that took. And we started going to church all the time. And when I say, if you grew up Baptist, you know what all the time meant. And so we were in church all the time, and that's when church really became a real part of my life. And so from the age of maybe 8 or 9, church really became very much a part of my life. And so I grew up in the Baptist church. I went to Youth for Christ in my high school years, and then went to college. And I think that's when my theology began to change a bit. And I began to question kind of pieces about what I had grown up with. The thing that brought me to the United Church of Christ was I was in a religious drama group at Baker University. And we performed in churches on Sunday. And one of the churches we performed in was Plymouth Congregational Church in Lawrence. And when I got married and was looking for a church to attend, after sleeping in on Sunday mornings in college after a while, the only church I knew was Plymouth Church. I didn't know anything about their theology. I knew nothing about the church, except they let us have our end of the year banquet there. So I went to that church one Sunday morning, and I heard a message about a church that was very much engaged in their community. And I'm like, I've never heard of a church like this. And my undergraduate degree was in social work. And I kept going to this church, and they were engaged in things that mattered to me, things about a person's everyday life that made a difference in people's everyday life. And I decided this is a church that cares about things that make a difference in people's lives today, not the here and after. And I joined that church. I call it the evangelism of space. Because I didn't really know anything. I didn't even know it was the United Church of Christ Church. It was Plymouth Congregational Church. And so I joined the church based on what I knew about that local church. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I learned it was part of the United Church of Christ. And a conference minister, it was an associate conference minister, asked me to do something. And because I'd grown up Baptist, I didn't know how to say no to pastors. And so I said yes, and I went to a conference event. I learned about the United Church of Christ, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're kidding. There's something bigger than Plymouth that's like across the country, around the world, and I learned the history of the church, and I was hooked because this was a church that was committed to being in the world. And that was it for me. So that's how I became a member of the United Church of Christ. And the rest is sort of history as far as my spiritual journey.
Well, thank you for giving us a glimpse into that part of your journey. So how did you end up coming to work, as I understand it, for the national setting of the United Church of Christ, and then as our Kansas-Oklahoma Conference Minister? What was that like?
There was a time that the national offices for the UCC was in New York. They were located in New York, and there was something called the Location Committee, because having offices in New York, hard to believe, was pretty expensive. And so there were these discussions about where the national offices should move, or if they should move. And there was a recommendation that went to the General Senate that the offices should be relocated to St. Louis. And it failed. And so I was really mad because I was living in Lawrence, and I thought it would have been great to have the offices in St. Louis. And I was grumbling about it, and there was a new location committee, and the conference minister recommended me to serve on the location committee. And so I ended up on that location committee too, that ended up with the offices being recommended to serve in Cleveland. As a result of that, there was someone that was staffing that committee that when the position of secretary of the church came open, she called me and said, I think you ought to apply for the position of secretary of the church. And I said, really? What does the secretary of the church do? I didn't even know what the secretary of the church did. And so I looked at the position, and I also said, it's probably not a good idea. I just started a new job at KU. But after I thought about it, I called the conference minister, who was Gail Engel at the time, and talked to him about it. And he said, I think you ought to apply for it because you seem to enjoy church work. In fact, he would always call me up and say, I hope you're not letting your job interfere with your church work. So I applied for it, never really thinking that I would be selected for the position. Because I was, nobody. I was not in the heart of the UCC. Kansas wouldn't be called the heart of the UCC. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any political connections in the church. But I interviewed, and to my surprise, on Super Bowl Sunday, by the time I got home, they called and offered me the position. I would have never, ever applied for that position without someone calling me and encouraging me to put my name in for the position. And that's really how I ended up there. So my kids that were 5 and 9 at the time, and my husband picked up and moved to Cleveland, Ohio. And that was it. That's how I ended up there. Actually, the same thing sort of happened about coming back to Kansas, Oklahoma. never planned on coming back to Kansas. We had been in Cleveland for about 20 years. We had built a house planning on retiring in Cleveland. When the position for the conference minister came open, I was actually a reference for someone else. I knew that you had to be ordained to be a conference minister. I was a lay person, and I'd been in Cleveland for 20 years and had never, ever pursued being what's called an authorized minister. But I decided I would, and so I got commissioned. And then someone called and said, actually it was the person that was staffing the search committee process for conference ministers. She called and said, maybe you ought to put your name in the position for Kansas-Oklahoma. And I said, what? I don't plan on going back to Kansas-Oklahoma. And you have to be ordained to be a conference minister. And she said, no, they're changing it. You have to be authorized. And I had just gotten commissioned. And I said, Kansas, Oklahoma, we're not moving back to Kansas. But I talked to my husband, and Jerry said, you know, if we're going to move any place, it should be home. His mother was 95 at the time. And if we're going to move someplace, maybe we ought to move home. And so I put my name in for the position. And so as I look back on it now, I kind of wonder, you know, maybe it's where I'm supposed to be.
I think I speak for the clergy colleagues of mine and for our congregations. I say, we're so glad you did. We're glad you found your way back home. And we've been so fortunate to serve with you these years. I'm sure there have been lots of them. But if you can name just maybe one or two of the most challenging situations you have faced as our conference minister, and then maybe just one or two of the most rewarding things or accomplishments, if any come to mind.
I think the most challenging, you know, they say you can't come home again. And in some respects, that's true, because when I came back, I had to readjust that this wasn't the conference I left. And so I had to readjust my mind to who KO was in 2011 or 2012, as opposed to 1991. Churches everywhere had changed. And so it was really hard to make that psychological adjustment to a conference that was, 105 churches when I left, and to a church of a conference of, it must have been maybe 65 churches when I returned. And a conference that was in some ways, well, in many ways, in distress. And so adjusting to that reality psychologically was a challenge. And the psychological, what seemed like kind of depression that was in KO was really hard to overcome. And the seemed like detachment from the conference, because that was not the conference that I had experienced when I was here. So that was really a hard adjustment and a challenge for me to kind of overcome, to try and get people engaged and kind of gain some trust and credibility in the conference. And I think that wasn't just KO. I think that just had to do also with just a change in what the church was and what a whole middle judicatory meant and where mission is located. It used to be that the conference was the source and the hub of mission and ministry, and that really changed over those years. It became more in the local church, and so that was kind of an adjustment. The other, and I think that goes with that, is getting the attention of people, getting people engaged has been a challenge, because now we're like 53 churches in 2 states. and getting people to be engaged in the conference. People's lives are busy. And so it's been really challenging to get people engaged. And the thing about that is, the real problem with that, other than just not having enough bodies, is people don't give to what they don't know. And if they don't know or value the conference, then just even the resources to do the ministry is more difficult. So those have probably been the biggest challenges. But there have been some really wonderful things to celebrate as well. New people finding the UCC, like you, David, and becoming excited about the story of the United Church of Christ. If you look at the pastors that we have now, some really young, gifted, excited people who have come to the UCC because of who we are and are learning about the UCC. That's been a real gift. And one of the really great things is when we ordain people who have come and found the UCC. That's just really a great thing to celebrate. The fact that the conference chose to be open and affirming. I heard stories about the churches that left back in 2005 after the vote to be same-gender, to celebrate same-gender marriages back in 2005. The fact that the discussion about being an open and affirming conference, it was not, it wasn't turmoil, it wasn't a fight. The fact that we were able to affirm the need to sell our camp or give our camp away so that it became its own 501c3. It was a hard decision, but it wasn't a contentious decision. So we made some really tough decisions to move forward without rancor. We don't have a conference office. We're a virtual conference office, and we were the first to do that. And we did that because we were looking to the future rather than being intent on holding on to the past. So those are things to celebrate.
Well, thank you. And it definitely took your courageous leadership as well as some visionary folks to follow and to back that and to promote it. So we're grateful. Thanks for highlighting those things. So as you head into your final year soon with us before retirement, I wonder, is there a message that you want to leave us with as we move into the future? What's on your heart as you think about heading into this last year? And what are you hoping we're listening to and remembering and taking with us forward?
I think the thing that concerns me most is sometimes places that have been in transition and come out of it too much around a person. And if they're not careful, they can fall back into old habits. And so I hope that the foundation we have built together, that KO is adamant about building on for the future. And that is done, the work that's been done hasn't been done just by me. It's been done because you've had leadership that wanted it to be done and allowed it to be done and pushed for it to be done. And that you look forward to doing that continually. And that you're adamant about a common vision. Because the way that KO will move forward is that our churches and our pastors say, this is our common vision. This is what we are called to do and be in our two states. This is what sets us apart. Because we're not going to be everything to everyone, but who are we as churches on the plains, in the plain states? And when we claim that vision, that common vision, and we're all working toward that common vision, that's what will propel you forward. And I really hope you can decide and rally around really who you are as your common identity as churches in the United Church of Christ on the Plains States. That will be hard to do because, you know, we're so committed to our autonomy as individual churches. And there's a place for that. But there's also a place for our covenantal relationships into the future. And as a conference, I'm not sure that's as strong as we need it to be so that we can say, this is where we're headed as a conference. And so I really hope that that will be something that our churches will unite around and build on into the future.
Well, thanks for that wisdom. I hope we're listening, and I hope we'll take action on it. So this next question I have is, you know, a bit sensitive, but I hope that you're in safe company here and can speak freely. But I wondered if you would describe for us what it is like, in your experience, of course, to be a Black woman leading a conference filled with mostly predominantly white people in the pews at the churches in our conference. So what observations could you share about your own experience or about racial justice struggles in our congregations or communities across the Kansas-Oklahoma area? That's a wide open question. I'll let you take it in whatever direction you wish.
Well, don't shy away from the tough questions or anything, David. You know, I really had to come to terms with that reality. And I had to decide to either embrace it or shy away from it, because it had to be one or the other. And I finally made the decision that maybe I am here for such a time as this, because people know me and they called me. And when they called me, they called all of me. And perhaps I can speak to this issue during this time because they know me. And maybe that gives me a certain amount of grace, credibility, I don't know, whatever. But it certainly gives me an amount of responsibility, I believe. And so I decided to use my voice because I feel I must. And so I have been more, I think, vocal about the realities that I experience personally. I can't speak for every African American or every Black woman or every Black person, but I can talk about my own experience. And I can talk about what it is like to be a Black person living primarily in white spaces, with white folks that I care deeply about, whom I believe care deeply about me, but are often unaware and sometimes insensitive, maybe even unintentionally, but that doesn't mean it's inexcusable. So I've done that. We have worked hard. We've done the white privilege. The KO made some commitments to do that, have been doing that. Many churches, many people have worked very hard at it and are waking up in new ways. Some churches are very much engaged in this. I get notes from people often working on it, and sometimes I get notes from people that are difficult. There are churches that still think it doesn't matter to them. They will say, we don't have any people of color here, it's not our problem. And I don't want to say, why do you think you don't have any people of color there? And quite frankly, as long as you have that attitude, you're never going to have any people of color there. And quite frankly, there are people of color in your community. And if you're not listening or if you're not open, you're not going to have any people of color. And I wonder how people of color in your community are viewing you as church. And I want to say to all of our churches, it is all of our problems. If you believe in the gospel message, how can it not be of your concern? And I do believe that people in their hearts want to be better, but don't know how, have learned something different along the way, maybe don't know where to start. And so I just encourage everyone, wherever you are, to take just the first step. No matter what that first step is, I believe there are a group of people in KO that will walk that journey with you. But you have to be willing to say it's your journey also. No matter where you are, no matter what church you are in, it is your journey as a faithful follower of Christ. That's the only way that we are going to be a different church, a different people in our country. That is the only way the divisions in our country are going to be healed. It's not my responsibility. It's your responsibility to know that no matter who you are, you also have to do this work. That's my word to you. And I don't know anything else to say.
Well, you've said a lot, and I really appreciate it. And I guess that's what I want people that listening to think about is, what would the next step for you, those of you listening, what would it look like, the next step to make this a more justice-filled world rather, for people that may not look just like you? That's the challenge, I think, before us, to decide it's our battle and it's our problem, and that we all need to take a part in fixing it and working towards full equality. So I guess we're getting down to the end of our time together, Edith, but you've already offered some challenging words as well as some hopeful words. But if there's one more word of hope you would offer us as we continue to strive to be faithful during this season of both COVID-19 pandemic, as well as this season of social unrest in response to racial injustice, what word of hope would you tell us as we continue to strive to be faithful during this difficult season of life?
I would challenge us all to remember that there is a difference between who we are as people of faith and everybody else, okay? Our faith is our touchstone. And sometimes that sets us apart, and it's hard to be set apart because everybody else may be doing something different. And we often feel out of step. We often feel especially out of step because everybody else may be doing this and we're doing something else. But Jesus was out of step with the majority. Jesus was out of step, and we often are too. And so that's pretty good company to be in. And I just want folks to think about the good things that might come out of this place. COVID-19 is not a good thing, believe me. I think we would all say that. But many of our churches are doing things so radically different, and some good things have come out of that. Being virtual has said to folks, we are reaching a lot of new people that we never would have thought possible. And what can we learn from this? Even though we'd like to be back in our buildings, who have we been leaving behind because we've been so tied to our buildings? We would have never imagined that we could be worshiping online. In fact, we resisted it. But who have we been missing because we've been tied to our buildings? Maybe we'll go back to our buildings, but maybe not in the same way. What will we learn about worshiping differently? The other thing I hope we'll remember is how important our voices are in Kansas and Oklahoma. How important it is for people to know that there is a church that welcomes you and loves you, no matter who you are, no matter where you are on life's journey. People's hearts can be broken when their church does not welcome and love them. And we are a voice that says, you are loved, you are welcomed, and we can save people's lives, literally. What other good news, what better news can there be? And that's the message of the gospel that we want to extend. That's the grace of God that we want to extend through our churches here in Kansas and Oklahoma. What better word can there be?
Amen. Well, we certainly thank you for your time and for your wisdom, for your years of faithful and courageous leadership. And we're better because of you. And we thank you, Edith. And we will do our best to take your words to heart and to put them into practice. And when we do it, we'll remember you, and with love and with inspiration. So thank you for showing us what that looks like.
Thank you, David, for the opportunity for the conversation. I appreciate you.
Blessings, and we'll see you soon.